All right. I think we're back. I don't know. I don't even know. Man. Let's see. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Okay. My down rate looks pretty good. Oh, all right. I restarted my router. I think we're good for now. Hopefully. Like I said, it's been acting up really been very weird the past couple weeks, and I thought I had fixed it, but I guess not. So hopefully I can get that fixed for next stream. Yeah, I think we're good now. But yeah, so vocal chops, that's where we're at. Let's see what we got. So, I mean, you could probably tell from the chops, but it's basically just chopped out from there's a phrase that she has. We actually wrote this one together. She came over to my studio one day and we wrote this part of the song together. But it's like, take this all away. I think that's like the part that I chopped out. I don't remember what the whole phrase says, but actually I'm curious. We have, yeah, so there is some writing notes here. Might be long way. Where do we do it? Take this all away, I think, is the part. I think it's like something like this is where I took it from. This like extended pre that we did, which I only ended up, I think I used it in the second half of the song as the actual vocal, but then used it for the chop because I like the take this all away part. It's really cool. But without all of with all this stuff on it, it sounds like this. Oy. I apologize. We're gonna have to restart it again. Really struggling on this one. Yeah, no, let's not save it. So for future breakdowns, when I'm in Ableton, this won't be a problem. Because Ableton doesn't crash every 5 minutes. But Logic likes to crash a lot, so here we are. But yeah, for the chops, basically, like I was saying, part of a vocal phrase, took it, mostly kept the phrase intact, just chopped a couple things out here and there. And then just did a ton of processing. That's really it. I'm relying on the core melody that was already there, and then I just like accentuated it a bit. But yeah. And that drop was actually newly added towards the end of the song. I mean, the original drop was way different. Not way different, but it was pretty different from that. And then realized I needed to change up the drop a bit. We ended up moving to that. Oh, what's up, Jacob? Our internet's bugging. I don't know, you can probably hear me through the wall. Chilling. You get to watch me with all my tech problems on Logic. You get to see why I switched from Logic to Ableton. One of the main reasons. Takes forever. But yeah. Yeah, we need to figure out the internet. We'll I'm probably gonna do that this week, honestly. I don't want to get a new router, but it might be what I have to do. Because I know it's something to do with the router. It's not with the modem. At least I'm fairly sure. So Antonio, the vocal chops were chopped. Like I basically just took the phrase. I could probably just stretch this out, honestly. Hold on, let me see. But I chopped them from the audio. I didn't put them in a sampler. I sometimes do that, sometimes I don't. But this is the full phrase. No, we don't want to do that. Okay. Okay. So that's the full phrase. And that's without all the stuff on it. Take this all away. I wanna feel like we're okay. I wanna know what I should say, but we've been holding. A lot of processing, but yeah, I basically just took that phrase and just chopped it up. I just like chopped and screwed certain elements. I basically would listen through it on loop and be like, okay, that's cool. Let me repeat this area. Let me cut this little section out. Yada yada yada. And I like the way I do vocal chops is 50% that way and 50% just throwing it into a sampler and playing out things and see what happens. But for this one, that's how I did it. In terms of the processing, most of the tone comes from these little altar boys. There's two of them because this one I automate in basically an octave up at some point. That's not what I want. That's what I want. So here, and I don't even bring it all the way in, but this is the octave or the mix for this little altar boy, which is basically just, you know, an octave up, and then format shifted a little bit down. But I bring it in less than half in, just to kind of give another harmonic in there, like a unison octavier. And then automating the reverb quite a bit. So like basically doing little reverb throws here. This is the dry wet for the vintage verb that's on here. And that vintage verb is right here, which is pre-OTT, pre-sausage fattener. So any moves that I make with the mix knob here they're gonna be exaggerated because they're earlier in the chain than the OTT and the sausage fattener, which are just gonna pull everything out, right? So that's what's going on here. And then I might be doing a mute. I am. And then I'm just kind of automating mute on certain parts just to give me those hard cuts so that, yeah, it just kind of has more flow to it the way I like. So that's that hard cut I was talking about. So that's that little like that kind of pump and then breath feel to it, or like it breathes a bit. That's from automating this reverb up after that ends. So just kind of like suctions back in, so to speak. So that's going on with that. Also, I'm using a shaper box for, I guess, more rhythm. I didn't even remember doing this, but okay, let's see what it sounds like without it. Yeah, so that's without it. So it's like, I think I'm doing some of it. Yeah, there we go. I was about to say, I know I'm using it a little bit because I heard it in the beginning. So I'm using it at the beginning of the phrase, and then I think when all these chords and stuff come in, which is around this area, I let the vocal chops breathe a bit more, so they have more of a pumping rhythm at the beginning of the phrase, then chords come in, they breathe, and all kind of mixes together. For sure, yeah. What's up, wonderful? Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining. Yeah, no problem. We're struggling to get through it today with internet problems and Logic being the way Logic is, but we're getting through it regardless. And so that's mostly it for the leads. I think, as I was saying before, all these other lead layers in the drop are doing the same melody more or less of the vocal chops. They're just accentuating it just so it pops a bit more. If I were to play that. So yeah, there's some weird, I think one of these plugins might be messed up. I don't know why the left channel isn't really playing loud, but that's pretty much it. Just accentuating that vocal melody. Bass and sub, I'm not really going to go over because I don't think there's anything interesting. The only interesting thing, it's just really just, I got an 808 in there, nothing special there. A respace. So these are like the mid basses and the drops just to help fill out the low mid frequencies a bit. And the sub is just a clean sine wave, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so a little bit of an extra harmonic in that voice on the left side, but nothing crazy with the sub and the bass. But I am in the second verse using a real bass, so like an electric guitar bass. And that's what this sounds like right here. Moto bass is my go-to for this type of stuff. And for those like punk bass tones, usually your P bass is what you want. I tend to use I like the 60s P bass, but sometimes you can use the 70s. But yeah, P bass is like the punk sound, at least to my ear. So, and that's like what guys in like Blink and stuff like that, like those bands, they use those, Mark Hoppus and all them. So Antonio, one-on-one sessions, not right now. My plate is unfortunately too full. Maybe in the future, maybe next year or something, I might open up to doing one-on-one sessions. I've done them in the past, but I can't do anything right now just with my current workload. But if I do open up sessions for like one-on-one sessions, or like open up for mixing and mastering and stuff like that, I'm gonna let people know. So I'll be open about that. Jackie, so the mid bass, yeah, we can look at it. I mean, like I said, it's pretty simple. It's probably just if I remember correctly, just gonna be a saw bass. Like the Reese is probably just like a detuned saw and a sine wave. There's really not anything. I think it's really easy to overthink mid basses, and yeah, the simpler the better usually, because when you get too crazy and too phasey down in the low mids, it messes up the stereo image a lot, and it just kind of muddies your mix a lot. So it's keeping it pretty simple. So this is that Reese patch I was telling you about. See what it sounds like. So doesn't sound good. It's very simple, but it fulfills the role it needs to when you combine it with that one. So with it, so like I said, on its own sounds like bad, but when you fill it with that wider low mid bass, this is the mid layer that's spatially the mid layer that kind of gives the weight, so to speak. And then this other second layer here is like the more of a saw Reese sound to it. The detune spatial like stereo spread layer. Yeah. So all right, I kind of lied a little bit. This is a little interesting, but I'm using it from a preset. Like it's from some Snail thing. I think this is one of the stock presets in Serum. But this is an interesting kind of bass. The fact that it's a Reese bass, but it's F'ing from B, basically like a weird harmonic type of sine wavetable FM'd with a detuned saw wave, which is kind of interesting for a Reese. Normally it would just be 2 saw waves or 2 sine waves, depending on what type of tonality you want in your Reese. And then you just detune. You can either detune with the unison or you can detune with fine and coarse knobs. This case, I am detuning a little bit with the fine knob, but I don't know what is detuning that. LFO4. Yeah, so basically there's like some pitch wobble to the fine, so it just kind of gives it a little bit more unsteadiness, a little bit more movement to the mid bass. But if you want like a really solid mid bass to start from, which is one patch, there's actually, if you go in the Discord, I did a free sample pack, and it's got like, well, the sample pack has like kicks and snares and stuff like that, but it's also, I've got free patches, like Serum patches and stuff. And one of the patches is called like Mid Boy or something like that. And it's literally one of the patches I use in almost every song for my mid basses. It's a really, really good starting patch for a mid bass. It just works in like a lot of things. But yeah, and the patches are for free. So they're in my Discord. There's a link to them, and yeah, go grab it, have fun with it. There's also some growls and stuff in there, but that mid bass patch is like my go-to, and it kind of solves a lot of the problems and like the guesswork for trying to figure out your mid bass. It's a good starting point. But yeah, that's pretty much that. I think I do have a couple little interesting things going on here. I don't know what they're doing. So this is a distorted triangle wave, it sounds like. Just kind of doing a little bass fill. So not quite a triangle wave. Polygon dust. I don't even know what wavetable that is. And this is some metal texture layer that kind of goes with it. But yeah, you could achieve a very similar tone of that bass fill with just like taking a triangle wave in Serum and throwing a bunch of distortion on it, like tube distortion, and then like an OTT, and you're gonna get something similar. Maybe you have to do like an envelope, like pitch envelope on it to kind of give the attack sound, but you get very close. Okay. So I think I'm gonna move on to the guitars, because the guitars are cool. I like the way the guitars came out in this one. And I don't think I'm doing anything crazy. There's a lot of guitars, but the mixing isn't anything nuts. My guitar mixing is usually very simple, and I feel like the simpler the better for this type of stuff. So yeah, let's look at the verse guitars. Actually, we're just gonna look at the second verse, because the second verse has the most guitars, and it's the same mixing throughout this whole song for the most part. But yeah, we'll kind of focus on the second verse, because I think that's where the guitars sound the best anyways. That's right, we need the acoustic guitar. I apologize if that was a little loud. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the guitars. I'll do the acoustic later, or after the electric. So I split my guitar groups into an acoustic guitar group, electric guitar group. They're playing essentially the same thing. Acoustic's doing more of the strumming, more of like the chord strumming pattern. But the guitar, or the electric and the acoustic, are essentially playing the same type of thing. like notes and chord wise. So we've got little basic strum, just a down strum, like nothing crazy. There's not even a strumming pattern. Okay. And then in terms of processing, as you can see, both of them, it's just a left-right hard pan. So I record each guitar layer that I do, I record twice. So it's 2 takes, and then I hard pan it left-right. Gives it a stereo image because obviously each take isn't perfect. So there's going to be small differences in the stereo field, which gives you, or small differences between each take, which gives you the perception of stereo. And then on both, this is how pretty much all my guitars are processed. It's one guitar rig. So basically, if I just listen to this one, this is straight up center. And all I'm doing here, you might hear a little bit of sidechain dipping, but that's not any extra processing with this. Basically, kick it off. Like, this is what I use a lot, is noise reduction. Because I have single coil pickups on my Strat, and single coil are noisier pickups. So even depending on the way I hold my guitar, it'll pick up like EMF noise, which is electromagnetic field noise from my computer. So my guitar recordings sometimes are very noisy. So I throw a noise reduction thing on there to kind of, fix some of that. Then I have the amp sim here. Fire breather is what I use a lot for like punkier sounding tones. And the cab. Again, nothing crazy here. I think this is mostly like the preset that it started with, which is high gain breather. I know I add in the noise reduction. These, I pretty much load them up and then I just like tune the gain until it sounds about right. I normally like to go for like on the edge of breakup, and breakup is so guitar, so for the microphone I'll talk about with the acoustic. For the electric, it's just DI, so I'm plugged straight in. I'm plugged into my Apollo Twin. I'm using the DI on that. And then I should mention this as well. For my electric guitar, I'm recording. So this is my UAD Apollo. This is the console, right? Right now you can see my vocals are coming through. I've got a little bit of EQ and compression on them. Maybe a little buttery, But my guitar is my left channel here. I record everything through this left channel for guitar. And I do record through this analog, like summing. It's not a summing unit. It's just like a pre, basically. It's like a guitar pre. Or preamp. And I do a little bit of, so I'm actually dipping off the highs quite a bit at 10K. And again, I have noisy pickups, so I'm trying to take off some of that noise. That's why I'm doing that. And then also dipping a little bit at 100 for the lows. So the reason why I use this is not really as much for the EQ. It's more because it has, like, the pre helps amplify the signal in a cleaner way than if you were to amplify the signal in your DAW. And there's not really a great way to explain it. That's just kind of like analog pre sound better. And it's hard to explain. You'll hear it when you compare them with like just doing a utility gain increase in the DAW. It just sounds better to do it in the, like, with an analog type pre, basically. Or it's modeled analog, right? But yeah, so that's what I'm doing. And this is, whenever I record my guitar through this, my guitar is printing with this. So all the audio that you see, like these takes right here, they have all of these effects already printed onto them. I can't change those after I record with it. But I like the tone that I get here, so I go with that. And then all that goes into the guitar rig. And then from there, so basically I'm starting off with a more round and warmer tone to begin with, just the DI tone. That gets sent into the guitar rig, and then I sculpt further from there. And most of the sculpting, basically I'm doing EQ, not a lot of crazy stuff. I'm dipping a lot out of the low mids at 630. And that can change depending on the mix. That's just what I'm doing here. And then I'm actually boosting at 6K. I wouldn't normally do that, but I'm shelving there. So normally I wouldn't boost there, but that's kind of what I did for this mix. And then also taking a little bit of the lows out. I would actually probably normally run that up even further. And then stomp compressor, just like a general, it's basically like the equivalent of a pedal compressor, like that you would see on a pedal board. And then a 2A just to kind of smoothen everything out. I try to have relatively smooth takes to begin with, so it helps, but this just kind of further levels everything. But yeah, that's literally all the guitar processing. And then all of the guitars get summed to a bus right here. And then on that, I've got a little bit additional EQ. This is just to help, basically, like help make it fit in the mix a bit more. And then that little radiator I was talking about earlier, just kind of give it a bit more of an analog feel to it. And then this big clipper thing is just to control dynamics. That's it. But yeah, all the guitar tone comes from here. I don't do any other processing beyond that. But the sound that sounds really good is honestly just double taking hard pan left right. Versus, so I mean, it just makes it feel alive, it just kind of really brings the life out of it, or brings life to it, so to speak. So for the electric guitar processing, like I said, that's pretty much it. In terms of the writing, like basically all I'm doing here, I got those downstrokes, and then various palm mute sections. Some of these are the same, they're just double stacked, and then so it's like 4 of the same essentially, but then played slightly differently, right? Like you can see by the waveform, sometimes I'll have more like heavier palm mute, so I'm like very stiff on my palm, basically on the strings or near the pickup, so that I'm like, it's more plucky essentially. And then other times I'll be loose on the palm, so it's less of a mute and more of just kind of like a soft mute, so to speak. I don't really know what the word is for it. So yeah, regarding expensive, basically what I said about expensive guitar versus good processing and all that stuff, the best, you can get away with a cheap guitar, but you have to do a lot more work to make it work, like to make it actually sound good. So I would recommend going middle of the road and getting a guitar that sounds pretty good. So like price range, you're looking at like 300, 400 and above. You get to like your mid-tier area. And that's like your quality is going to be pretty good. And also focus on pickup quality and string quality. That's where you get most of your tone from. And also like how you play, obviously. And then the second side of that is having a really good amp sim and cab sim. So for me, I'm using Guitar Rig, which gets the job done, and it worked for this, but I actually don't, I use something that's a lot better in my opinion now, and I can talk about that later. But Guitar Rig is a good starter. You can get good tones out of it. You just got to work a little bit more. And then, yes, audio interface is going to affect the quality, because it's basically like if you're using cheap technology to record the signal of your guitar, the signal is going to be recorded poorly and you're not going to get the full bandwidth. You're going to have crackling. There's going to be all sorts of issues, right? So I can't speak on too many because I've only used a couple, but Apollo Twin is what I use. They have really good DI, like a DI circuit on it. So it's impedance match, so that everything like sounds good going in on the guitar, from the guitar into the box. And as I was talking about earlier, You can also use console and things like this to kind of help impart more of an analog tone onto your guitar, so it sounds more real and less like a digital, so to speak. So, and then in terms of the guitar that I'm using is a Fender Stratocaster. It's a Fender Stratocaster, but it's a Mexi Strat, so it's Mexican made, not American made. And the difference there is, like, honestly, it's like $1,000 difference, but it's just quality. Like, the individual components is it's a quality level. That's the only real difference. In terms of like the tone sound, it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much just like having an American Strat is just to say you have an American Strat. The tone isn't that much better. It's kind of marginal. So that's why I got the Mexi. But Mexi Strat, mine costs like $650, $700, something like that. I don't know what they go for now, but that's a really good like mid, kind of upper mid tier guitar to get. Really good tones, and it also depends on like what you're going for. Because I mean, for me, I like more of the punk edgier tones, so I like the single coil pickups. But if you like something a little bit softer, more pop driven, you might want to get a Tele, which has the humbucker pickups, and it's going to be, wait, I think it has humbucker. I can't remember, to be honest. And the acoustic, I'll get to that in a minute. I'll get to that when I talk about mixing for the acoustic, because it's very, it might surprise you. Okay, so like I said, that's pretty much it for the electric guitar. But this is what I was talking about with the different. So that's one palm mute tone. Hold up. And this is the other palm mute tone. Oh, crap. So one is just more muted, one's less muted. That's it. So that's it for the acoustic, for the electric guitar for the most part. Acoustic guitar. Now, overall, I'm going to take a step back. The reason why pretty much most of the stuff that I do when I do guitar, I do both acoustic and electric. And the reason for that is, even if the acoustic is more buried, acoustic guitar has a nice pick attack sound to it that I really like, and you can make it very airy without a lot of the hiss that you get from electric guitar. So layering that with electric usually sounds really good, which is the whole reason why I do acoustic guitar. Also, like for strumming patterns just sound crispier and they sound nicer on acoustic guitar. So for this guy, this is what this whole thing sounds like. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. The bulk of this is the yeah, so strings on the guitar like definitely affects the tone. Your tone is driven by three things: strings, pickups, well, I guess in terms of acoustic, the mic and like proximity to the mic. So strings, pickup, whether that's like on electric, the actual pickup, or the mic on an acoustic. And then the third thing is how you play it. So that'll determine how you play, determines how much squeak you have when you slide up and down the strings, determines how much buzz you have, whether like you're pressing the string fully down, if you're accidentally on like one of the frets, stuff like that. But the majority of this acoustic section is like strumming. And the processing is pretty simple. I think all of them, let's double check. Yeah, all of these are all the acoustic guitars. And for the most part, they're processed the same way, as you can see. Same EQ, same compression. And there's a little bit of like reverb on this section, but that's that like spacey high pluck that comes in. But the rest of it is pretty much just EQ, some compression, fresh air, which is basically just like a high shelf plugin. It just kind of boosts the highs, but in a nice, pleasant way. And this is free, by the way. You can get this from Slate Digital, or it used to be free. It might still be free. I don't know. And then just some additional compression here and soft clipping. But yeah, in terms of the EQ, I actually use one of the Logic, like I start with one of the presets, which is this guy. And then as you can tell, I like modified it a bit, basically just cutting out some of the low end. But this is what this sounds like. Sorry about that. But yeah, pretty much just like taking out some of this low mud, leaving a little bit of that 100 so it has some beef to it, and then just kind of, yeah, get a little bit of presence band and a little bit of the highs. Yes, so you can. Oh, and so sorry, Vendetta, I answered only half your question. I changed the strings. Honestly, depends on how much I'm playing it, even though strings still oxidize when you're not playing them. So it's probably realistically once every 4 to 6 months, sometimes longer, but it just depends on how much I play. Like, I can tell when the tone starts to go and when the strings feel bad, and that's usually when I change them, is when they feel bad. But that's just from having played enough and like known what bad strings feel like. And then, so check, yeah, so for the processing, yeah, it's very similar processing on all of them, and I could have grouped it. The reason why I don't is because, I mean, this is a very minimal difference. Probably in terms of CPU, it would have been better to just group it all and like do the same processing on all of them. The only thing is when you do that, because you're sending all this audio into one compressor, the compressor is going to behave differently than if you were just having just this one take go into the compressor. I didn't want certain takes to be buried under other takes. So like you probably have had the effect where like you take, say you have 2 sounds going to a limiter and one sound is way louder than the other sound. It's going to push that sound down because the limiter is only going to react to that one sound, if that makes sense. So it kind of accentuates the difference in level between the two. It just depends on the type of sound. But so for this, I wanted each individual take to have texture to it, and so the compressor is bringing that out. If I had the compressor just on all the takes grouped, it would kind of mesh them together in a bit more of like a soup, if that makes sense. It's not like as clear as if they were all individually processed. Again, it's a minimal difference. It's not like a huge thing. It's just something that I've tried both, and I like the way this sounds a bit better. But at the end of the day, if you're running low on CPU, it's a pretty good option is just to group all these into one thing and do just these 4 plugins on all of them, because you'll get a pretty close sound. In terms of the compressor, not doing much. Like, you know, I think it's probably like 5 dB, looks like. Let's see. Hopefully it'll play. Yeah, so I mean, only a couple times it's peaking up to 5 dB. I'm not doing a lot of compression here. Really just leveling out some of those peaks. I'm kind of letting some of the peaks get through, but then I'm just kind of flattening the whole tone of the guitar out, if that makes sense. And then, yeah, doing, again, additional compression after that. In terms of recording it, because acoustic guitar, like, mostly sounds good, or most of the tone and everything comes from your mic technique and how you record it. I could kind of show you real quick. So, this is my acoustic. It's very simple. It's not very nice. It's got like holes in it and crap. It's an Alvarez. I don't even remember. I've had this guitar for probably 12 years. I don't even remember how much it costs. It has a mic pickup in it. You can see that. But it's always low on battery, so it doesn't actually work. It only works if you have the battery in it. So what I do is I record it with this mic right here. And mic placement for recording acoustic is very important. Basically what you want to do is, I mean, the mic's turned, so it's a little weird, but the idea is to aim between, I mean, it depends on the type of tone you're going for, but for most stuff for me, I'm aiming halfway between the opening of the acoustic, which is going to give you more body tones. It's going to give you more of the low end and more of the full body sound of the acoustic, and the fretboard, which is going to give you more of the like squeaking and more texture sound to it, basically. If you aim kind of right in the middle, so right here where the neck pretty much connects with the body, you're gonna have a mix of those two tones. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, you just kind of do it on plane with like this line right here is what you're aiming for. That's it. And honestly, like, the best thing to do is experiment with that. Move the mic around a bit, record a take, move it again, and record another take, and just see what sounds right. You'll know when you're in the sweet spot of the mic, when you're in like the pickup pattern of the mic, because it'll sound the best. Like, you'll hear full body tones, you'll hear like all the texture and all the detail you need to get out of it. And that's pretty much it. But that's like the trick, though, is aiming between the neck, like the far end of the neck, and the body. So right where the neck connects with the body. Yeah, so honestly, like, that guitar style I learned just kind of, I mean, the Illenium style of guitar to me is like the plucked melody thing. So not really, this verse is not really Illenium style in my opinion in terms of guitar. It's more like Y2K, like pop, sort of pop punk, but more pop guitar sound with the strumming, like the open strumming, a little bit of palm mutes, and yeah, just straight strumming chords. Like, it's not really too EDM-y sounding. I think the EDM sounding stuff is going to be like these parts right here. That like that picked melody where it's just kind of like a dun, it's just a single melody on the guitar, and it's like picked over, and it's something catchy that you can loop over and over. That's kind of like the Illenium style. And that, honestly, I just learned, yeah, the arpeggiated, like, melodic style thing. But like, that I learned from just listening to some of those records, basically. Like, just listening to some of his songs and figuring out how he did it by ear, and just kind of learning to play some of them and be like, okay, I see why he did that and stuff like that. I'm actually trying to move away from that a little bit, but yeah, that's kind of it. Like, that whole idea is just like coming up with a melody that's like catchy and kind of fits in with the overall melody of the drop and like the vocal hook and all that kind of stuff. And the only way there's not really a trick. It's really just, I just play around on my guitar for a bit until it's something that sounds cool. I think the only trick I can think of is doing something like moving in the progression that the song is already in, right? Like, so if the verse is in a certain progression, then the picked melody should kind of progress in the same way. So like, maybe the first note of the picked melody is the root note of the first part of the progression, and then like the third or fourth note is the next root note of the next part of the progression, so on and so forth. Yeah, so exactly kind of what I was just saying. Basically play around. Like, a good trick is just to kind of start on, like, learn what the root notes for each progression, each like part of the progression is, or each chord in the progression, and then just like play that in time with the progression, and then start filling in notes in between those root notes. And that's just kind of how it works, honestly. And the notes you choose, if you just fill it within, like, if you just use the chord voicings, so if it's like a C major and you use like a D and an E, or maybe you use a G or something like that, it's all on the same scale, those notes are going to work, and then you just use some kind of variation of those notes to get the melody. And then pretty pretty well that it's like gonna work with the chord progression. I do know, I know who Buckethead is, but it's like kind of, I'm familiar with the name, but like I'm like not, I can't picture him quite. So the tuning on my guitar I change basically around. So like, I mean, this song's in G major. I could have had this in like drop D tuning or even open D tuning. I change my tuning on my guitars all the time because for me it's like cheating. It's like an easier way for me to write my melodies. So for instance, if my song is in D major, I'm going to tune my guitar to either drop D or I'm going to tune it to open D. And that like makes it so much easier for me to be able to write chords and just kind of like play the actual chords as well on the guitar instead of trying to reach in standard tuning to figure out like what works in that key. The problem, yeah. So changing tuning is nice, except you wear your strings out sooner. So there's like a pro and a con there. It's also kind of annoying. That's actually why I always have a tuner on my acoustic guitar, because I'm always changing. So like I said, it's nice for writing, but you wear your strings out faster, and it takes longer to set up, obviously, because you got to tune it every time. But yeah. Yeah, so that was me like literally a couple years ago, because I've been playing guitar for years, but I like kind of stopped playing for a while and started picking it back up like about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And yeah, it was like when I first started writing with guitar, I always tried to write in standard tuning, right? And for certain keys, just had the hardest time trying to figure out how to do chords and like how to get my fingers to reach and everything. And then one of my friends was like, yeah, just change the tuning. And ever since then, it's been really nice. Yeah, so even for like, yeah, so every guitar in all my songs is real recordings. I don't think I've ever used a sampled guitar. Well, I mean, it might have been my own guitar that I resampled, but I don't use any like Alenium, like Echo Soundworks types of guitars or anything like that. I've always just used like my own guitar takes. Yeah. No, you're good. Actually, Chacky, you're perfectly fine. Like I'm pretty much done talking about the production of this one. I think the guitar was the last interesting point. I already got through the drums, the percussion, all that kind of stuff. There's nothing really interesting in the effects. I mean, I can go through really quick, but it's really just like atmosphere loops and stuff. But I will say, even though I'm kind of skipping over it, effects are very important for the song. They add a lot of atmosphere, and they add a lot of like kind of a bed to the whole instrumental, so that it gives the vocalist something to work with, but it also gives the whole song a space, so to speak. So I wouldn't just like gloss over effects while you're producing. Usually the first thing I start with when I'm starting a new song is an atmosphere loop and a chord progression. Those are the two things. I can just let that play, actually. Yeah, so it's interesting you say live guitar in a show. It's something I'm kind of considering. There might be some more info on that later this year, but I do have an idea for that. Yeah, so I can go over group processing in a second. So for lead synths, so I talked about that a little earlier, but essentially like this song doesn't really have lead synths. It just has the vocal chops, and then everything else is supporting, and so they're not really like sticking out, so to speak. I mean, and the verse, you got these little arps, but it's not really a lead. It's just kind of a filler. So it's a nice little like trill there. And then for the drop, this is the drop lead. There's the drop leads. So it's pretty much the leads are just supporting melody wise with the vocal chops, but I'll solo them real quick. Okay. So the effects that I use for leads, I'm trying to think the best way to answer this. It changes per production. Like in general, I think I would definitely use, like, if I want movement in the lead, there's one of the main ways to do it is playing with the sense of space. And so especially in the drop, because like a lot of times your main leads in the drop are pretty dry, depending on the style of song, right? Something that's more aggressive, the lead's going to be more dry because it wants to be more in your face. So in that case, what you can do is throughout the drop, automate a reverb dry wet on that lead, and it'll push that lead in and out of the mix, and that gives the listener something to grab onto and like kind of let go of and stuff like that. So I do that a lot with my leads, is I play with the sense of space. You can do that with reverb, delay. You can also do it with filtering. So in, like, for instance, in this one, I actually, the beginning of the drop, there's a small little fake out, and then the leads filter in. Well, okay, I lied. They do filter in, I'm pretty sure. Oh, the chords filter in, my bad. But you could do the same thing with the leads. So like right here, this is where the drop hits at 33. Like, bah. When the chords filter in, right? So essentially, to the listener, the chords are coming out of the mix. Like they're pushed back and then they're coming towards you in the mix. And I'm doing that with filtering. For like a super saw, it depends. Hyper saw and super saws are two different things in my opinion. For a hyper saw, I actually would do something like AU5 has a really good tutorial on a hyper saw. I would just like look at his channel, but you can do that with one layer and just one serum patch, and he literally goes over like that exact serum patch, and it's really good. It's actually incredible. You can use it right out the box. Like it'll fit perfectly in a lot of mixes. For a super saw, honestly, like standard super saws are a little played out in my opinion. I think to make your lead more interesting, saws are still very important in production because they help fill out the frequencies, they help fill out that space. So they're still good to use, but I think just a bare super saw is not going to be very interesting to hear anymore. Like it's just, a lot of people have heard it so many times. Obviously you can focus more on the arrangement and all that kind of stuff as well, but I think a way to kind of do more interesting leads is use samples. So you can like go through Splice, look at synth one shots, put that in a sampler and just try that out. You can like do a super saw lead and then throw some like crazy modulation effects, like a chorus effect or an ensemble effect, or like a weird phaser or like a crazy reverb on it, and then throw a redux on top of the reverb, bounce that to audio, and then play around with that. Like essentially there's a lot of different things you can do, but rendering to audio and then playing again with it kind of gives you like a new fresh slate to start with, so you're not just like stacking up 20 plugins on one channel to try and come up with a unique sound. So I would highly recommend resampling. Also just like experiment with new tones. So instead of using a saw wave, maybe use like, you know, like SL Monster or something like that, like in Serum, like one of the crazier wave tables. Try the bend plus or minus modes, that helps as well, and you can automate those to have like different tones throughout your lead. Yeah, so brass guitar and violins. So those are good. That gives you more of the like orchestral vibe, right? But for like, I guess to really answer your question, super saw, I don't really use a lot of layers. I think for my big saw stack in this song, there's 4 layers. So it's like a decent amount. It's a medium amount. But I could get away with something even less, to be honest, just if I was more clever in the processing. Also, white noise. Don't forget white noise. It's a nice little trick for EDM production for pretty much any genre. And this white noise literally just sounds like white noise. This is what it sounds like. Oh shit, I need to... Does it get through here? There it is. So that's just playing along with all the synths. And as you can see, it's really just that like 6 to 12K area. But white noise is really good to help fill out some of the frequencies. Sometimes you can use it for the mids, sometimes you can use it for the highs. But it's pretty low in the mix, negative 32 dB. So no, the MGK remix, that vocal was a mission. I did use an AI software, so I used like Vocalizer or like Lala Lee or something like that, Lala AI or something. It's one of the popular ones, but I did hey Monica. Or hey Monica, I forget where my camera is. I did use one of the AI things for the MGK thing. It was like Lala AI or something, but that only got me started. Like the final result from that software, still wasn't anywhere near good enough. So I did like, maybe one day I'll go over the vocal processing on that song, but I did a ton of processing to make that vocal clean enough, like that vocal rip clean enough to where I can use it in an actual song. There's a reason why no one has a remix of that song, and that's the reason. Yeah, la la la, yeah, you got it. I mean, that's the one. But like I said, it wasn't that simple. Like that was just to get me started. I think one day I'll definitely do a breakdown of that, because it's an interesting like engineering problem of how I was able to get that vocal clean enough. I spent almost half a day or like a day on it just to get it there, but it was a whole project. Yeah, so some leads some leads can be a lot of layers. I would say 13 layers. 13 layers is a lot. If it ended up sounding the way you wanted to, then, that's good. But I would just caution, when you get to too many layers, you end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot and backpedaling a bit. Like you can end up making your job way harder than it needs to be. What I've found, the more and more I've like gone in production, is that often, but not like all the time, but in most cases, the simpler choice is kind of the better one. So like instead of just doing like a 13 layer stack to get the sound you want, try to be very selective with only a couple layers, but have each layer do exactly what it needs to do and not overlap with the other one to get the sound you want. And you're going to find that the mix is probably going to be a lot easier when you do it that way. So just something to keep in mind. There are still exceptions. There are times when like you do need to do a ton of layers to get that particular lead sound. Even in this song, right? Like for this drum hit, this is, I don't even know how many layers this is. What? 20 layers, I think, for this like percussion loop, right? And it's not 20 layers, but it's probably like each hit has about 3 to 5 layers. But yeah. So that's pretty, I would say, probably borderline or actually excessive for a percussion loop, but it got me the sound that I wanted. So, and I even tried taking some of those layers out, like later stages in the production process, and like found that I actually just wanted all of these components in there. So, I am starting back up regularly, and actually, that reminds me, if I am going to do this regularly, I have to be pretty careful on my time. I think 2 hours is gonna have to be my cap because, yeah, I gotta do some other things today. I gotta get some other stuff done. But yeah, I'm aiming to do every Wednesday 5 p.m. Pacific time for max 2 hours. So it'd be like 5 to 7. Sometimes the streams might be a little shorter depending on what we're doing. But yeah, I'm glad we were able to get through this one. I know we had quite a few hiccups with the internet and stuff like that earlier. But is there any other questions before I hop off? Thank you guys for all tuning in on the stream as well. Like I said, I'm going to be trying to doing these more regularly every Wednesday. I think once a week for right now is probably the most I can stick to. Hopefully, maybe later in the year I can ramp it up to maybe twice a week. But for right now, once a week is all I can promise. Sure, yeah, go ahead, Jackie. Actually, so I'm not going to quit the stream, but I'm going to be right back. So go ahead and type your questions. If anyone has any questions, just type them out. And I'm going to just run to the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back and I'll answer your questions. All right, we back. So curious what groups. Okay, yeah, so I can quickly go over that. I'm not gonna go over, I think I'm gonna do a separate stream on like methodology for mixing and mastering, because I think that's a whole separate like dedicated thing. But I can quickly just show you the group processing on this one. There's not much. At least I don't think there's much on this song. We'll see. We'll go through it. So for the drums, so these are my groups on the left, right? Drums, percussion, VR, we can forget that. So essentially drums, percussion, Vox, the white noise layer is sitting out, chords, leads, and all that kind of stuff, right? For the drums, all I have on the group processing is essentially just a big clipper. So most of my my buses, you're gonna see they're gonna have this plugin at the end of the chain, and this is like how I control my transients, right? This is kind of one of my like secrets, quote unquote, for getting those louder mixes. And I'll go in depth about why I use this plugin and like how I use it in a full like dedicated mixing breakdown stream, because there's kind of a lot to it. It looks like a simple plugin, but it can do a lot and it can be used in a lot of different ways. So I'll talk more about that some other time. But essentially, it's using it to be like a clipper. So I'm clipping the drums for the percussion, also clipping it, but I'm also adding a little bit of high boost, so kind of a little bit of EQ work essentially. For the vocals, this varies per project depending on how I do the vocal processing, whether I do it like on individual channels or I just group them all to a bus and then just like do it on the bus. It just depends on the song. But for this, you'll usually see similar type of stuff on most of my chains. So essentially it's going to boil down to, for the vocal bus, like EQ, compression, some type of saturation, and then the big clipper. So EQ and compression, or just the EQ, I'm getting knocked out with this, which is an SSL channel strip. I love this plugin because the EQ sounds really good, and since it's not graphic, which meaning I can't not like the Pro Q where I can see where all the frequencies are and everything, I'm forced to use my ears for this guy. So that's why I like the SSL a lot, or just any channel strip for that matter. This is just the one that I use. The other reason I like this one is it's got total harmonic distortion, which is essentially like analog distortion. I usually crank that, so if you go all the way to the right, it's just like more distortion, but it's nice, softer sounding distortion. So it's good on certain things. It works really well on vocals, in my opinion. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I really like this channel strip. And this one I got on Plugin Alliance, and they run deals like all the time. I think it normally goes for like 200 or something, but you can get it for like $50 like during one of their sales. So very good plugin. What else? Then I got some EQ. This is more like surgical work, but I think I've got a little bit of dynamic EQ on this. But as you can see, it's put on the 3 dB. I'm not doing much here. I'm just kind of, some of those lows, I'm just having it so they kind of like level out the lows a little bit. Low mids around the 400. I always find that like 400 to 600 can get a little congested. Sometimes I'm in 700 area. So I just kind of dip that a little bit. I like more like clear sounding vocals and less in your face, like proximity sounding vocals, if that makes any sense. Little radiator, you've seen this a couple times already. I really like the sound it has. So like I said before, I usually would just throw it on, turn down the heat a little bit, and turn up the mix. And it just kind of adds a little bit of an analog, slight distortion to it. Kind of warms it up. And then, what is this? Oh, de-esser. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff. Sometimes on my vocal chain, there'll be multiple de-essers. Just depends. And then, yeah, big clipper. Actually, I don't think I ever talked about the vocal mix on this. That'll probably be a separate video because I can't go over it today. Yeah, again, nothing crazy here. Like, the vocal chain essentially always boils down to EQ, compression, saturation, and that's it, really. Like some de-essing, but that's also, de-essing is just a form of compression. It's just single band compression. Okay, yes, questions. Yeah, so for big clipper, again, I'm gonna answer that question by doing a mixing stream, because it's unfortunately not really a simple answer for that. Like I said, big clipper, amazing plugin, deceptively simple looking. It's not a simple plugin, and it took me probably a good month of like using it to figure out how to really use it. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good information on their on their user manual. So, and the GUI can be a little confusing. So, I will break this down in a separate stream because it needs more of a dedicated stream for it, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking transient versus less transient sounds, for me, the general mentality or the methodology is more transient, I tend to clip, less transient, or less, I wouldn't call it more or less transient. I call it like sounds that I want to be more aggressive and more poppy, or like pop in your face, I would clip. Sounds that I want to be softer in the mix and more transparent, I would limit. That's essentially the methodology. And then, okay, Vendetta. Yeah, so no, absolutely. I think at pretty much any level, producers, you get rejected by labels. I still get rejected by labels. I've got a batch of songs going around right now, and luckily this batch has been getting some good reviews. Like people are like liking the songs, but I still have some no's from certain labels, and it happens, you know, like it's just something that's gonna always be there. Rejection is like the constant in the music industry. The way I take it and the way that I like handle it is I just you kind of grow a thick skin. Like you have, this is where you have to believe in yourself, you know, like if you have, and it's hard to do, especially starting out, because you don't know if your music is really good or not, or at least it's hard to believe in your own music because you don't have like a lot of external validation. And it's just, you just got to believe in your music, basically. Like there's not, I don't know, you know, just kind of do what's true to yourself, and don't just make things because labels want to hear that thing. Definitely don't make music just to get on a certain label. Like make what's true to yourself, and it might not fit on a bunch of different labels, but eventually someone's going to see the value in it, as long as you continue to see the value in it, right? There's a market for so many different types of sounding music. Like you don't have to make a Millennium style future bass or melodic dubstep or like, you know, even heavy excision type of rhythm or whatever. Like you can make crazy off the wall stuff, and eventually you'll find your pocket, you'll find your niche. That's the beauty of like how open everything is nowadays. But yeah, basically just like double down on like what feels the most natural and like the truest expression of yourself through music, and then eventually people can kind of sense that if you're being true to yourself, you know, people will kind of gather around you, and they'll also really like what you're doing. Thank you. Yeah, so the Out Wild remix, I really like that song too. I would love to do a breakdown of that one. That was a really fun song to do, and I wish more people knew about it because I think that remix really goes off. But yeah, definitely would do a breakdown of that at some point, because there's some pretty cool stuff I'm doing in there as well. So drum samples, lately I've been making a lot of them, but for this one, earlier I just said it, like I'm using some blank kicks. These I got from his Patreon. I was subscribed to his Patreon like last year or the year before for a little bit, and he dropped some sample packs for his members, and so I like his kicks. And honestly, like I learned some drum processing from him, and have made my own kicks with that. And now most of my songs I use my own samples using the techniques that I learned from him. But yeah, other than that, like a lot of my drum samples can just come from things that I find on Splice. It's tough to know what are good samples. I think it's just something you just learn over time by going through so many different types. But yeah, lately all my kicks and snares have been my own samples that I've been using. Yeah, and Chacky, in terms of processing, that's very common. Like for me, up until probably a couple years ago, my processing used to be way overkill. I used to do way too much to my songs and to my individual channels because I thought I needed to do more to get more out of the song. And often it's the exact opposite. I think the skill of being a producer, and you realize this the more experienced you get, is knowing when to stop your processing and when to say, you know, a sound is good, or like that raw sound is good enough, or like the recording needs to be re-recorded, or like something like that, right? So just like having the ear for that and knowing what you can do with certain things without overcooking it. It just takes time. Like honestly, it's a very natural progression to do a ton of to get, you know, overcomplicate things, and then once you get more experienced, you go back to simple. You know, you just got to make more stuff, do more things. But it comes back to developing the ear, and yeah, there's really no quick way around that. Yeah, so stereo width on mid basses. I normally adjust the stereo width in the synth. So most of my mid basses are done with Serum. I'd go to Matrix or Global, and you can see on my width right here, I have, these aren't 100. So normally they default to 100, right? What this does is I'm doing a respace, right? And I'm using Unison Detune. Unison Detune is going to spread it around the stereo field, right? You go to Global, and this width knob, what it does is it controls how wide that stereo detune is. So for the left one, it's the A oscillator, right, is the B oscillator. And what I'm doing here, normally it's 142, just says it's like about half of the normal width. And so a lot of times it'll be like 0 and 10 or something like that is usually what I do. But from this one, I had a bit wider. What plugin? Which plugin? The de-esser or Serum? This is Serum. I don't know if you're talking about this one. It just has a different skin on it. It's the anthracite skin or whatever. Yeah, that's it right there. What's up, Oasis? I'm not sure if I'm getting the name right, but thank you for joining the stream. Greetings from US. Yes, I do. So stereo width, this is basically it right here. I do it in the Global tab, and this is adjusting the Unison stereo spread. So I do, yeah, I do it in the DAW, or in the synth, sorry. But typically, yeah, my mid basses are close-ish to mono. Sometimes they're wide. It just depends. I don't know. I do it in the DAW because I feel like, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that. It's just one less plugin to use. If I were to do it in the DAW, right, like there's nothing I can use on the channel strip in Logic to adjust the stereo width. I can pan it, but I can't adjust the width. So, you know, I'd have to add an extra plugin, whether it's like Isotope Imager or some other third-party stereo imaging plugin. And so it's just, I don't know if you call it laziness or whatever, but it's just having to use less plugins is nice. So that's why I like to do it in the synth. I don't think there's really any other reason for it. Yeah, so transition Ableton is very nice. All my songs are in Ableton now, and I have a song coming up in May that started in Logic, was mostly done in Logic, and then I went to go do the final master and ported it over to Ableton to do the final mix and master, just because like I feel like my workflow in Ableton is so much better. I feel like I can do a lot of extra things in Ableton that I could also do in Logic, but it just takes a lot longer, and it's just the workflow is very nice in Ableton. Yeah, Ableton is, I think, king for speed producing and just like getting things cranked out, like getting an idea down. I don't think there's a better DAW for it, honestly. And I've used FL, I've used Studio One. I don't think there's anything better for workflow and speed. Yeah, so wonderful, good point. Yeah, so no matter like which source or like playback system you go to, it's always going to sound different. This is kind of like the fundamental idea of why you get higher quality playback equipment, right? So like such as like monitors, like you can't see them right now, but they're literally right there. I have Yamaha HS80Ms, so they're not like that good. I actually need to upgrade my speakers, but they're pretty good. And the whole point is the higher quality you go, the flatter the frequency response. And the idea is that if you mix through something that has the flattest possible frequency response, if it sounds good on those speakers, it'll translate well to other systems, regardless of the system. That's the very simplistic idea, basically, though. So, but it's always a struggle, right? Like now, I mean, when you're going through headphones, like I go through these AKGs, right? And they're open back headphones. So open back has a nicer mixing stage. They just sound more natural, but they also lead, my ears and stuff don't get sweaty. Like it's like more comfortable to wear as well. So I can mix for longer. But they still have a frequency response to them. They have a sound to the headphones. So it's basically like putting an EQ over top of everything. And there's a plugin, or there's something that I use to combat that. And what I use, I'm not using it right now, but is Sound ID Reference. I'm sure you guys have heard of it, but essentially these are my headphones, right? The AKG K712s. And it's a software that like all of my audio passes through this. It applies a correction EQ curve to try and like create the flattest frequency response possible. So that's the idea. I won't go into too much detail. If you guys want to like know more about this stuff, because this is a bit of a rabbit hole in itself, I can do that later. Well, I'm not going to do it on this stream though. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like headphone speakers, all that kind of stuff, like maybe we can talk about that more in the mixing stream when I do a dedicated mixing stream, because I think that could be relevant. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and quit this. Yeah, I'm probably going to go ahead and wrap the stream up. I need to quite a few other things I need to do today. But thank you guys for coming through. For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, sound design and like, getting the sound that's in your head out is difficult. Like I even still run, I've gotten a lot better about it because I've been doing this for so long, but like there's still some times where I run into problems where I'm like, I have this particular thing that I want to get out, but I can't quite get it there. And yeah, it happens. There's obviously like you develop techniques to get you around those little roadblocks. But it still happens every now and then. Definitely gonna do a mixing stream at some point. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I gotta figure out how I want to structure that one, because there's a lot to talk about in the mixing stream. Because all my breakdowns that I've shown so far, it's definitely more production oriented, but I do a lot of stuff in mixing, or at least have a lot of like ideas that I'm acting on. But all right, guys. Thank you guys again for coming through. I think I'm gonna go ahead and peace out. But again, every Wednesday, 5 p.m., I'll be here. Also gonna be trying to upload these videos to YouTube so you can rewatch if you want to. But yeah, I will see you guys next week. Also, if you haven't already, you should join my Discord, because I'm trying to be more active there, but we're going to be adding like roles and stuff like that. I've been pretty AFK, or like, I guess, MIA from like the past few months because I've been working on a lot of music, but now I'm trying to get back more involved in that stuff. So hopefully we'll be doing some more things on that end. But yeah, I will catch you guys later.